Hello and welcome to Dialogue. The U.S. will be holding a second edition of its Summit for Democracy this week. What's the purpose of the summit? Is democracy simply an end in itself or a means to something more substantial? Why is the U.S. promotion of democracy viewed with suspicion? And while it regularly examines the human rights record of every country around the world, why doesn't the U.S. examine itself and its own human rights record, both domestically and internationally? To discuss these issues and more, I talked to Dr. Fred Membe, President of the Socialist Party of Zambia. That's our topic. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thank you for speaking with us, Doctor. Let's start with democracy, or your understanding of democracy. Is it the end or is it the means to something concrete?
It can never be an end. It's a means to something much more important to a human being. It's much more a means to the happiness of a human being, to the welfare of a human being, to all those things that constitute a dignified life of a human being. Access to food, access to housing, access to clean water, access to health services, access to education, national sovereignty in the country which that individual lives, national honor, all those things constitute democracy. And also, in some way, they matter to human rights.
It sounds like governance, good governance that delivers, and then people do have the access, or people enjoy stability, prosperity, and opportunity to develop themselves. So probably, maybe there are different forms of democracy, but a good governance, it does deliver, or poor governance probably fails to deliver.
What is good governance? Good governance is the ability of people to participate in the governance of their communities, in the governance of their societies, in the governance of their nations, and indeed in the governance of the world in which they live, to ensure that their interests are taken care of, to ensure that their dignity is always under consideration. That's what matters. Those are things that really, really matter to a human being.
Can we say, if there's a good governance, obviously there's participation by the people, or reflection of the will of the people, and then it delivers. That's why we call it a good governance. If we judge countries by that standard, there are countries we can say who are well governed, like Singapore. Or if you look at the track record of China over the past 40 plus years, the strong economic growth and improvement in people's living standard, it shows Chinese system, whatever you call it, it delivers.
The Chinese system does deliver. The Chinese system does respect human dignity. To govern and lead a people of 1.4 billion human beings is not an easy thing. And especially a country that started off very poor, as one of the 11th poorest countries. It's not easy to bring it to where it is today. If you have no respect for human beings, the human beings would not also tolerate that. You can't oppress 1.4 billion human beings and they just keep quiet. And they just tolerate. And they watch you. Even if you are so powerful, you are so hardworking, how can you take care of 1.4 billion human beings without their participation? So it shows you how strong the governance system, how appropriate the governance system that has been employed in China. And also, good governance is not only about caring about the human beings in your territory. It's also caring about the human beings outside your territory. How do you treat other people? How do you relate to other countries, other nations? What is your attitude towards others? What you do inside your house matters also in terms of what you do outside your house. If you don't, you clean your house every time, but the environment you are destroying, are you a good person? For how long are you going to live in that house secure? Mm-hmm. China has demonstrated the ability to live well within its territories and to live well outside this territory, to respect people within this territory and to respect the people outside this territory. You cannot claim to be democratic. You cannot claim to care about human rights when you enslave others, when you brutalize others, when every day you're insulting, mocking others. You have no respect for others other than yourself. You exploit others, you plunder other nations. You dictate to others what they should do in their homes. You can't be a good person, even inside your own house. So China has demonstrated not only being good to its own citizens, but also to the global citizens. China has cared more about our global environment than any other country. Despite heavy industrialization, China has cared more about the environment than any other country. It has done more to protect the environment than any other country. This is the country that has developed without having colonies, without enslaving anybody, without plundering anybody. This is a country that has developed with mutual respect for others, win-win cooperation with others. What more can you ask of a people that is pushing so hard?
But then if you look at for example, the coverage of China in the Western press or in remarks by Western officials, in particular US officials, they often refer to China as the biggest, or top challenge or biggest threat to the US existence. How do you understand that kind of allegation or criticism?
You can understand why they are worried about like a country like China, because China is working in the opposite direction to them. China is working to free other people and free itself from being plundered, from being humiliated. This is the country that the USA is a country that has thrived, survived, prospered from slave trade, cross-Atlantic slave trade. They enslaved the Africans for centuries. They plundered the resources of Latin America, the resources of Africa, the resources of Asia. They plundered even the resources of Europe. This is the country, if plunder today, exploitation of other people is removed, the USA will not be the powerful country that it is today. If there is equality in the dealings with each other, the USA ceases because it doesn't know how to deal with other people on an equal basis, with other nations on an equal basis. It gets lost. It's worried today with the multipolar world that is emerging because its hegemonic interests are being threatened. It's not China per se, it's the interests of the Americans that are being threatened with a world that is more equal, that is more fair, that is more just. They can't survive in that world because their methods of existence are based on plundering other nations, on humiliating other nations, on exploiting other nations.
Well, a related question, I would cite is, the Chinese efforts to broker, basically a peace deal for Saudi Arabia and Iran to resume their diplomatic ties. And then you see the Chinese efforts to create some conditions for peace or for ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine in this Ukraine crisis. But then if you look at the reaction or response from the US side, they try to dismiss the Chinese efforts or belittle the Chinese efforts as something else. Why is that kind of response? The Chinese efforts basically have been welcomed by the rest of the world. People see that as very positive, more peace, more stability in the Middle East, more reconciliation. What's wrong with that?
A world that is peaceful is not suitable for the United States because it prospers from conflict. It sets one humble nation against the other. it does not help to remove conflicts. It always creates conflicts. When you look at the conflicts that have existed in the world since 1776, when the USA was formed, the USA usually has a hand in it. When it doesn't have a hand in it, it doesn't work to resolve those conflicts. It works to perpetuate those conflicts because it thrives from conflict. It benefits from conflicts. When the world is divided, it becomes easier to exploit. It becomes easier to plunder. A united people cannot be plundered. A united people cannot be exploited. A united people cannot be made to fight each other and prosper. This is the country that benefits from wars. It prospers from wars. It creates wars as a business to make profits from. It makes profits from wars.
Well, the famous example is the military-industrial complex in the U.S. They certainly welcome conflicts and wars so they can, sell weapons, ammunition, and make a profit out of that.
Yes, and they are also linked to the media. They are linked to the politics. They are the sponsors of the politicians. So they have to find conflict all the time. If no conflict arises naturally, they create it so that their industries make more and more money.
And every year the U.S. publish, human rights record on every country but itself. What do you make of that? Some people accuse the U.S. of using the so-called human rights to interfere in the internal affairs of other countries, in particular the countries they are not happy with or they see as rivals. What do you make of that?
The pious arm of human rights that the USA waves all the time is hypocritical. This is the country that has invaded other countries, killing so many people, including children. This is the country that has appropriated the resources of other countries, leaving those countries helpless. Look at Iraq today.
20th anniversary of...
20th anniversary. What is happening to the Iraqi oil money? When Iraq sells oil, all the money goes to the USA. It's the USA government that decides how much to give to the Iraqi government to use. The Iraqi government has to submit a budget to the USA to get its own money after 20 years of that conflict. Is Iraq independent? Is Iraq sovereign? Iraq today is a colony of the USA. This is the country that occupies other countries' territories. For how long have they been there? Been in Guantanamo, on Cuban soil? A small island, the whole country of the USA, a huge territory, they still go and grab a small territory, not very far away from its own country, from its own coast. They have been occupying it for how many years?
Several decades.
The Cubans have been crying, give us our land. The USA does not respect the territory. Can really the USA claim Guantanamo to be their territory?
Right.
You can understand the same behavior in Taiwan. Same behavior. If today China or Russia went and did the same in Hawaii, what the USA is doing with Taiwan, would the USA accept it? They say, do unto others as you would like them to do unto you. Does the USA do unto others as it would like them to do on itself?
This is an interesting perspective of the point here. You mentioned about the equality among sovereign nations. That's an exercise of democracy, based on equal footing and expressing one's wish or one's needs or demands equally in the international community. Do you think there's enough democracy in terms of that respect?
If you don't respect the territories of other people, those territories are occupied by human beings. How can you respect human beings when you don't respect the territories which they occupy? How can you respect a human being when you don't respect the privacy of their home, the dignity of their home? A homeland is something very important to any human being. Every human being on this planet has a homeland. The homeland is their house. It's their home. That's why it's called homeland. You don't just get into somebody's house. You don't just get into somebody's country and interfere. If you don't respect the sovereignty of a territory, you cannot respect the human being who lives in that territory. You cannot claim to be committed to their democratic rights. You cannot claim to be committed to their human rights. What are human rights without a homeland? What are human rights or democracy without sovereignty? When your rights can be trampled on, when your leaders can be toppled anytime, when your leaders can be killed anytime. Look at what they did to Saddam Hussein. Look what they did to Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. Look at what they do to other people's leaders. Look even at the attitude, the arrogance towards other people. They never respect the leaders of other countries.
Interesting point you mentioned about respect for sovereignty. Part of the justification for the U.S. invasion of Iraq is to plant the seed of democracy in the Middle East, in addition to the so-called non-existent weapons of mass destruction. Is there a full-fledged democracy in Iraq now?
We have 20 years. Iraq today is ungovernable. It's a failed state. Since the murder of Muammar Gaddafi, is Libya today more democratic since 2011? Is Libya today more organized? Is Libya today more stable? It's a failed state. Wherever they have been, there are problems. Have they brought peace and stability and democracy and respect for human rights to Syria? Without the intervention of the Russians, where would Syria be today? They would have overrun that people. How many countries has the USA toppled? How many coup d'etats have they carried out? How many assassinations of leaders of other countries have they carried out? How many citizens of other countries have they killed? How many citizens of other countries have they arrested and detained and released without charges?
Well, in addition to the lack of respect for sovereignty or abuse of human rights, what about the record of the human rights record inside the USA?
Look at the treatment of black people.
George Floyd?
Yes. And when did black people start voting in America? The USA became independent in 1776. When did black people who were taken there against their will, when were they given the right to vote? It's not very long ago. Can you claim equal rights for black people in America? Go to American jails today. The majority of the inmates are black people. In a country where the blacks are a minority, but in prison they're the majority. Why? Are black people generally bad people? Is there something that can be done about that?
It's more than a human rights issue, it's a racism.
Yes, they're racist. Part of the hatred for China is racism. They cannot accept that a country that is non-white can surpass them economically and in so many areas of human achievements, of human endeavor. They can't accept that. But it is happening, it's unstoppable.
Human rights, it seems also is a bit controversial sometimes when it comes to the definition. For example, some countries or some people would stress the fundamental rights to access to clean water, health, decent living standard, etc. Others, mostly Western nations, they would stress very much about the political rights, like the rights to casting a ballot or voting in the procedure, procedure of practicing democracy. What's your point?
When people go to vote, who do they vote for? Do they vote for themselves? Do they vote for other people? When it comes to other rights like access to clean water, access to food, who do they feed? Do they feed themselves? Do they put water in their own mouths or in the other person's mouths? They care about voting because those poor people do not vote for themselves, they vote for them. They don't set a political agenda for themselves, they follow an agenda set for them. When it comes to the things that really matter, to food, to water and other things, it's about those individuals. So they don't care about those individuals. When a black person votes in America, who is he voting for? When a black person is eating in America, who is he eating for? In whose mouth does he put food? He's not putting food in Biden's mouth, but when it comes to vote, he's voting for Biden. So the vote matters because it's going to Biden. The food doesn't matter because it's going into that poor black person's mouth.
Globally, obviously there are differences in terms of democracy, but then if you look at, for example, the United States in 2021, they hosted the first democracy summit, and they do it again at the end of March, obviously. So some people say the US is attempting to use democracy as a tool, if not a weapon, to divide the world, to advance their, let's say, geostrategy, to contain the rise of China. They divide the world as democracy versus autocracy, and labeling countries as autocracy, authoritarian instead of democratic ones. How do you make of that?
They don't hide their intentions. That's the goodness with them. They say it very clearly. It's either you are with us or not with us. What does it mean to be with them? To be with them means to do their will, to live according to their will, to their dictates. When they say jump, you jump, then you're with them. If you don't, you are not with them. These summits are there to divide the world between those who they call dictatorships, who are not with them, and those who they call democracies, who are with them. If you are with them, you are not a dictator, even if you are one. We have seen this in Africa. We had Mobutu Sese Seko in Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of Congo. For how long did they sustain him? Mobutu had no elections. Mobutu squandered the resources of his country. He was still there dying. It didn't matter. They had the apartheid regime in South Africa. They were their friends. Was apartheid South Africa democratic? They had the white minority racist regime in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. They were their friends, they supported them. Was that a democratic regime? Was there a democratic dispensation in Rhodesia? They supported Pinochet in Chile, who toppled an elected government with their assistance. He was working for them. Did they care that Pinochet killed so many people? Did they try Pinochet for violation of human rights? For mass murders? What did they do with in Indonesia, with Suharto? How many communists were killed? almost 2 million communists killed in Indonesia. Have the Americans raised the banner of human rights? Has anybody been arrested for genocide? No. How many people did they kill in Vietnam? How many? Has anyone been tried for the murders in Vietnam?
Or the bombing of Nord Stream pipelines?
Yes. What is worse terrorism than that? Keeping old and young and children in Europe dying of cold? They do that.
Recently, the Chinese side proposed this global civilization initiative, calling for cooperation and coordination among different civilizations, while stressing the fact that there are a variety of civilizations around the world. What do you make of that?
The concept itself of global civilization initiative, it shows the care, the respect for other people. Yes, we are on the same planet, but we have been living differently in various parts of this planet for centuries. And we are at different stages of our own development. A superiority complex leads to many problems. When you want to make other people feel they are inferior to you, it's not a path to a peaceful world. So you can see the clarity of President Xi, of the CPC, in terms of the future of this world. You cannot build a future world that is peaceful, that is fair, that is just, that is humane, without respect for others. And here we are talking about maximum respect for others.
Equality and respect.
Yes. We are diverse. It's not by accident that we have so many languages, we have so many cultures, we have so many traditions on this planet. Even in songs, we sing so many different songs. Even in dances, we have so many different dances. Are they in conflict with each other? If you dance different from the way I dance, is there a conflict? If you sing a different song from the one I sing,
just natural.
Is it different? Doesn't that add to the beauty? They say in the Garden of Eden, there were so many different plants, so many different flowers, but they existed in harmony with each other. They added to the beauty of the Garden of Eden. If in nature's creation, things were ordered that way, who are we not to accept that diversity?
Harmony in diversity.
Yes. Unity in diversity is needed. Even a song. That's why in a choir you don't have just one voice. You cannot create a symphony with one voice. You cannot create a melody with one voice. You need more voices to create a nice symphony, a nice melody.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you very much.